G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and so far a fantastic week. Now if you're part of the Telegram, you'll know that I had a massive legs session yesterday and I'm sitting here in a fair bit of pain, but as always we do have a lot to go over. Of course we're going to look at the maps in the north, the south and the east and see where things are shifting, but a primary focus on the Kursk Oblast as well as Russia's offensive towards Pokrovsk and see how those two are affecting each other or are not affecting each other as much as Ukraine may have thought. So we'll talk about the north at length, and we need to speak at length about maneuver and attritional warfare also, and I hope that you'll find that interesting. And then we're going to look at some other strikes here and there too. So we'll start at the strikes because this part will be a fair bit quicker. There was a large Ukrainian drone attack against Russia last night. Now with every drone attack, whether it's from Russia to Ukraine, Ukraine to Russia, it is impossible to actually get an accurate idea of the interception rate, what targets were hit, what was not hit. So again, we just have to go with, I guess, the footage that is then released. But these, at least from some of the footage we have, appear to be UJ-22, then long-range drones from Ukraine as seen here. Now, we have some footage of these being intercepted as well. Now, one thing I will say with this footage is we do have a lot of footage actually of these being intercepted rather than footage of then strikes, which we have had before. But we do have some like this where it appears of large burning areas said to be at some airfields as well on the way to Moscow. Some of these were in the Moscow region, but wait for satellite imagery or more before we determine what exactly has been hit. I know there's a lot of claims out there today about MiG-31 aircraft as well. You can see another interception here from an attack a few days ago. That said, with any aircraft, any of this, satellite imagery is absolutely the bare minimum. And you can see then another piece of footage here of a strike as well from air defense. So someone in Russia must have actually turned on bloody air defense for once. Now, we spoke about this oil depot in the Rostov region, that has been on fire now for just over 3 days. Now, it appears that this started by a drone strike and a couple of these oil storage tanks being on fire, and then it has spread. So it's very hard to get a count due to the smoke, but there's at least 14 destroyed, but of a total of 44, I believe here, that are unknown, or it's actually more like 60 total. So again, this will clear up in the next coming days once we know exactly how much damage that strike caused on that oil facility. But let's come into the north, and I've got a little bit of more footage to show you. So here is Ukraine, the center, the capital of Kyiv. The red areas occupied since 22, the purple since 2014, the green area where Russia has been and Ukraine has pushed them out. Older than 2 weeks. The blue is that, but newer than 2 weeks. And the blue up here is then Ukrainian forces occupying territory on the Russian side. Now, not shown on any of these maps, but I'm seeing both Ukrainian and Russian pages reporting that there was a Ukrainian push into the Bryansk region. So we'll actually show you where that is on this map. It's a little bit easier because we can go up and down. So of course we have then Belgorod, Kursk, and Bryansk. Now, you'll be probably more familiar with the Kursk and Belgorod, but we have seen some minor shifts across into Bryansk as well. Now, none of the maps show that. Now, Russia will say it was a thwarted offensive. They're claiming it was up to 200 guys. And Ukrainian pages are saying that it was a recon group that went in and out. What actually happened here? Well, there was probably some amount of crossing somewhere, but other than that, again, we just really don't know. So let's step on to the deep state map. Let's have just a look. Now, we don't use this map for up here because it's very difficult to show what is happening. I wish it would show a blue check for ground made within the last 24 hours like they do with the red check for the Russian side. So we do see an increase on this map here, but we'll go on to the NOEL reports map because this one's a lot easier to see where gains are made. So we come in here, you'll just to get your bearings, Kotanova, Tetkino, and then of course Sumy down here and Suji in here. So just to give you an idea of where we are, and we do see 2 Ukrainian advancements today at Martinyovka and just down to the south towards Raska, Konopelka as well. So 2 advances here, but what you can see is that it does appear from the initial days, and we expected this. Anyone with any idea about maneuver attrition warfare, you have these large steps in the beginning, and then it does slow down into here. Now let's just compare this then across with the Syriac map. Let me move this across. So Syriac is showing out to the northwest, some ground being made as well, more ground out to the north, but this is now just showing more so of what then this map is showing. Of course, we know Karanevo. We saw then the geolocated footage of some Ukrainian vehicles operating in there, and it does show more of a push out to the south, out to the east, and on the southeast here too. So some of the maps catching up, going here and there, but Karanevo, Ukrainian Army continues to expand its presence in the eastern, southeast outskirts of Karanevo, in Suja, which is down in here. We're talking took Kolomakov, entered this Ruskaya Konovelka, so this is this front down here. So yeah, we get an idea where these maps are lining up. These two tend to be actually fairly similar currently. Now, one thing we do need to speak about is then we'll jump onto the deep state map, and we're going to go about this in length. Then we see there has been a major advancement down here in the Avdiivka Pokrovsk front directly to the south. Now, what we need to do is we need to talk about all of this and how then this is interconnected and how this can cause more issues. So let's just speak on this first, sort of outlay what is going on here and how does this affect up in the north one way or the other. Now, what I like to look at when we look at this map, so we have the Ukrainian map here showing this advancement. Now, one of the most important things about this advancement is if we jump onto then the defensive works map here, we'll come down. Now, this map is not up to date yet. So we see Pichi here. So this is more red right down here where my cursor is here. So give it another at least a kilometer south from where this map is sitting. But you can see the major defensive works in here that are coming under control from this southerly push. Now, one thing I have said is, look, if you push straight to Pokrovsk, you're heading directly adjacent into a defensive work like the defensive work wants. What we think is Russia could potentially do a large southerly push here, somewhat flanking defensive works. It doesn't mean the defensive works are useless by any means at all, but what it does mean is they're not going to be as effective of where they are sighted in for that most likely course of action. So you'll often see MLKW, so most likely course of action, and you'll also see most dangerous course of action too when you look at military stuff. But most likely is, right, we'll sight this in because we think the Russians are going to come east to west across here, but if you're coming down the other way, it can really cause some issues. This is what we presume Ukraine was trying to do in Robotny, south of Orokhiv. We saw this break in down in here, was trying to get into this Surovikin line, and once there was a break-in, then expand east and west because you'd have a lot better effect flanking those defensive lines than straight up the bloody guts into it. So we could see a faster shift south than we have been seeing pushing to the west here, and this map is tending to show this. So then let's look and see where Syriac is showing the same and or different to this. We like to get a couple of different opinions on this. So we see a push out near Horodka, but we also see down in the south here, very, very similar, as well as around Olivkia. Russian army took control over Horodka, as we said. In addition, advanced towards Olivkia. Moreover, Russian troops down to the south of Zavitny as well. And you can see there is a lot of open territory down to the south here. Open territory is very, very difficult to both push through and defend as well. So this is the speculation many have said with Russia's major pushes around Ugledar in the past week is, yes, it's obvious here the push west for Pokrovsk, but could there be a southerly push to take more of this ground, as we have seen Russia pouring a lot of resources into this Novomyelivka front, into Krasnohivka over the past, say, 6 months, as well recently just to the northeast of Ugledar down near Vodyan as well. So I guess we will see, but we'll go back up to the north because this is what we're, I guess, relating this all to. So people will talk about, let's jump on this one, it's a bit easier. Will Russia actually push on the Ukrainian troops in Kursk? Will they make a force large enough to push the Ukrainians out of here rather than just slow it down, stabilize. Now, the number of Ukrainian troops in here is difficult to know. It's between 10 and 30,000, the reporting. Let's just go 15,000 just for the sake of this. And you can use this however you'd want. But let's say 15,000. The Russians would need realistically around 40 to 50,000 troops to actually then dislodge the Ukrainians in here. I think, and I'd say if I was a commander looking at this and what has happened here, let alone the embarrassment of what has occurred here, but once it's occurred, you have to deal with it. Russia may see this, and I think a commander may see this as 1,200 meters squared occupied. Let's say 2,000 meters squared, because I believe that Ukraine will probably get at some point this part near Glushkovo, of course, south of the same river through here. And actually, that reminds me, I have some footage to show you of same river. So we saw those pontoons. This is HIMARS then striking the engineering vehicles here and these pontoon bridges. You can see they're a scary weapon, man. Clusters suck, eh? Like whether it's a Iskander or a HIMARS, look at that. That sucks. Anyway, sucks, but you know what I bloody mean. But okay, so let's just call it 2,000 square kilometers south of the line. If I was a commander looking at, if there's going to be negotiation in the future, would you happily swap back this amount of square meterage out of Russia's occupied around 100,000 square Ks? Would you substitute a 2,000 square K, change there in negotiations rather than have to pour 40, 50,000 troops to actually dislodge this? And the other benefit you have here is if Ukraine have and occupy this area, let's say 2,000 square meters and a few hundred K front line or over 100 kilometer front line, you're then forcing Ukraine, your enemy at this point, you're forcing them to tie up at least a few thousand more troops manning this new front line that they have made. So will we actually see Russia just try and stabilize this or actually try and push it out? Because I think the weight of this with 100,000 square Ks on one side, say 2,000 here, versus you can make Ukraine have to occupy this and logistics in here, troops in here, in case you do something, that may work at least in your benefit if you weigh up what's going to happen at negotiation, whether it's 98,000 square kilometers you occupy or 100,000 at the expense of 50,000 guys and jeopardizing potentially other areas on the front. Now, another thing that could happen here is we won't actually see Russian regulars take part if there is a dislodging offensive in here. We may see it handed off to, say, the Chechens or then to other PMCs who we know are working in here too, somewhat similar to Wagner in Bakhmut. So they can handball it off so it doesn't affect, I guess, the regular force in other areas. So that could be something that we see, but that is sort of large-scale strategy in here that if you go into negotiations, you have this area here that you may exchange for this, that you don't see that as jeopardizing. But what we need to talk about is up here, is this jeopardizing areas down in the east? Now, this is what we need to talk about with the a lot of sources talking about the redeployment of forces out of the Pokrovsk front hasn't occurred because there's other areas Russia is pulling out of that the tempo may not be really shifting, and that has caused an issue. And Zelensky has spoken about this in his opening line of his nightly address, at least hinting towards this. Several reports from Commander-in-Chief Syrskyi on our positions, primarily in the Pokrovsk direction, Donetsk region. Our understanding of the enemy's moves are strengthening our defences. So he has mentioned Pokrovsk very early on in this because I think there's a lot of questions rising over Russia's still moving here. You could imagine if you had 10,000 troops to try and stabilise this somewhere and they're up in the north. So he said the enemy moves as strengthening our defences there. Okay, our operations in Kursk region continues. Further steps are being taken and maintaining control of designated areas. I'm expecting grateful our troops units for replenishing the exchange fund. So this is something we've heard a lot. Exchange fund for POWs. Ukraine has stepped in. They've taken a lot of POWs. They've taken 1,000, maybe 2,000 square kilometres. At the end of this, will that be an exchange made there. And what I'm trying to get at is that exchange for Russia may be worth not pouring in troops to try and dislodge this either, if that makes sense. And Schulz, of course, the German Chancellor, has said Ukraine had prepared its military operation in Kursk region very secretly and without feedback, which is certainly due to the situation. This is a very limited operation in terms of space, probably also in terms of time. So I'd like to know more on what he actually meant in this too. But I think all of this with Ukraine keeping it secret, apparently from the West, is better ask for forgiveness than permission. It's not like the West was going to cut off Ukraine's supply of everything by doing this. I did talk when there was a nuclear power plant, speculation going around. That may be very different. But let's read from Telegraph, and we'll line this up with some doctrine. I want to speak about Crimea as well. So the first three will be Telegraph, and then the rest is attritional warfare doctrine. And then we need to look at what the deep state has said about the redeployment of Russian forces into here, where they're coming from, and how this is still affecting the increase of speed in around Pokrovsk too. So let's have a look at this. So let me move this across. This used to never happen here, but several elite brigades have now certainly been deployed, but Zelensky and military leaders waited a week before commenting and still haven't disclosed the operation's true goals, or what I'll say, what were the primary goals of this, because what I was getting told was it was a blitzkrieg much further into Kursk. Everyone called me a propagandist for that, but that was what I was told off a friend of mine who I know there. The strategic ambiguity is crucial in the information war, discouraging premature predictions. So of course there was a massive silence, and if they said this was our goal or we're doing this, you could make predictions and could be seen as a failure or a success. Regardless, there's a lot of silence on this, but as we see, several elite brigades are in here while other areas are potentially being compromised. However, it's likely the Ukrainian offensive aims to force, at least in part, Russia to divert troops from its ongoing Donbas assault to counter the threat in Kursk. So far, Russia hasn't taken the bait. While Ukraine advances in Kursk, Russia grinds forward in Donetsk. Also, talking of these bombardments could be part of a broader Russian strategy by Russian forces in Donetsk. As such, Ukrainian units expressed that diverting manpower to Kursk in favour of Kharkiv and Donetsk could jeopardise their current defence operations. And as we have seen, like I showed you on those defensive works and over the past week on the map in Pokrovsk, it has not only been still moving, but actually faster as well. That said, I will say there could be an element too of Ukraine stepping back here to extend the Russians and cause larger losses on them. That said, we have heard that that is what's going on for now well over, let's say, a year and a half, 2 years, and that attritional grind forward does continue. While Ukraine is relying upon it eventually to counter the Ukrainian advance in Kursk, what Ukraine is relying on is that eventually to counter the Ukrainian advance in Kursk, troops might need to be redeployed from other occupied territories in Ukraine. US officials suggest Russian forces have already been pulled from Crimea, Kherson, and Zap, where there is not currently ongoing offensive actions by Russia. And this is the thing, Russia isn't taking the bait from, say, an area like Pokrovsk or New York, but crucially, there are no signs of Russian withdrawal from the Donbas. First, if Ukraine continues to succeed in Kursk, Russia may have to pull more forces from occupied territories, potentially weakening their defensive positions. This could expand the range of Ukrainian drone strikes, further eroding Russia's long-range attack capabilities. This, I don't get how you've come to this conclusion here. Okay, Russia pulled troops, tanks, vehicles, say, away from occupied areas. Okay, yes, defensive, it weakens defensive positions there potentially. Does this expand the range of then drone strikes and long-range attack capabilities? I don't see how that has an effect there. If we're talking long-range attack capability, maybe Iskander, TU aircraft, I don't see how that comes through. That's why I've put this question mark on there. I don't see how, maybe with air defense shifting potentially, but then that air defense is going to go into an area where their long-range strike capability is going to be also, so your drones want to strike there instead. Anyway, let's keep going. Second, Ukrainian brigades currently training could be deployed to reinforce either Kursk or Donetsk. depending on where Russian forces show signs of weakness. This flexibility could allow Kyiv to mount counteroffensive in 2026 rather than just thrust into occupied Donbas. Now, so there are guys being trained who will bolster Kursk or Donetsk. That's great, the training of thousands, maybe even in the tens of thousands of guys. But for a mass counteroffensive in 2025, we need to see a mass conscription in the hundreds of thousands. At the end of the day, better trained units still need to just have mass of numbers as well. And I'm super shocked that Ukraine hasn't stepped out to mobilise in the hundreds of thousands. We heard numbers 6 months ago around 500,000, and it takes minimum of 6 months to actually roll through the training of absolutely all the degrees that you're going to need. Now, that isn't just training, but you minimum 3 to 4 months of training, an absolute minimum, and then you're going to need experience in other areas of the front as well. And I speak to guys as well who are like, I can't believe this isn't occurring months ago, let alone now. Finally, there's the ongoing Crimean offensive. Sure, Ukraine's destruction of the Black Sea Fleet and accelerated dismantling of Russian air defence in Crimea have put Russian forces on the peninsula on the defensive. Partisan attacks are increasing, and the Ukrainian intelligence suggests that Crimea will be the next target with the Kerch Bridge. Now, with the Kerch Bridge, we have images here that Russia are reinforcing the defences here. I think it's very likely we will see the Kerch Bridge struck, potentially taken down very soon. I've been saying that for a while though as well. How much effect will it have? Well, the Crimean offensive, it might be an air offensive, but it's not like there's a ground offensive on Crimea. Where are we? Ukrainian intelligence suggests that Crimea will be the next target. While a conventional offensive to retake Crimea seems ambitious, incredibly, the displacement of Russian forces to reinforce Donbas and Kursk could open the door to increase Ukrainian covert operations on the peninsula. Okay, so covert operations are fantastic. Special operations are fantastic. They have a massive place in war, absolutely, 100%, of course. But what these are to do, other than your high-value target elimination elements, but even these high target eliminations, these are to facilitate conventional large-scale movements. The reason that the SAS or Delta Force or Green Berets exist, well behind the line doing your cool hitter, black op stuff, whatever, that in a conventional warfare is to mount larger conventional scale movements somewhere else. That we've killed this commander, so our large conventional element will have a better luck against the forces because they won't have that ability of command, or they're striking this fuel facility, so it will affect at this strategic level of economic. But at the end of the day, special ops landing in Crimea is not going to liberate and take Crimea itself. There's going to have to be a conventional mass movement there. And I hear all these people who I don't think know what they're on about speaking about amphibious landings, helicopter landings, paratroopers, and I don't think anyone takes into account the logistics, the fatigue, the rotation of doing that. And in modern war, we're not talking World War II, and even then it was somewhat out of date, of amphibious landings and how weapon systems work. You see a boat coming or heli or para landings and see how that can end up. For example, look at Russia's troops landing at the airport in Kyiv on the first days of the war and see how that went, very quickly running out of stuff. And this is much, much further away. We're talking not just here, we're talking way out, maybe Sevastopol here. So how does a conventional operation here work? I honestly have no idea. The success of the Kursk incursion may not hinge on drawing off Russian forces, but if it continues to embarrass Moscow and disrupt supply lines, Russian troops will be forced to respond, ultimately undermining their operations in Donbas. So realistically, from a idiot sitting outside this, I was never senior in the military at all, but it seems like if Russia stabilise it and just suck up that there's 2,000 square Ks being occupied is probably the better move than trying to respond to the embarrassment that Moscow has had from this or trying to push back through it. But let's talk about this embarrassment and holding land too, and where some doctrine may sit in this too. In attritional war, any terrain that does not have a vital industrial centre is irrelevant. It is always better to retreat and preserve forces regardless of the political consequences. So regardless of the political consequence of how it looks on Moscow or how it looks on Kyiv, if they're stepping rearwards, it's better to retreat, preserve forces, inflict strikes on your enemy and stretch their logistics. But if you're going to fight on terrain, it needs to have at least vital industrial centre. But let's talk on this political consequence here too. The German obsession with Stalingrad is a prime example of fighting on unfavourable terrain for political reasons. So if your only political reason here is to embarrass a leader, it probably doesn't fall into what is, I guess, vital centres of terrain on your that actually benefits you. Germany burned up vital units that it could not afford to lose simply to capture a city bearing Stalin's name. Now, continue on this. Now, attritional wars. Attritional wars require, for their own art of war, and are fought with force-centric approach, unlike wars of manoeuvre, which are terrain-focused. They are rooted in massive industrial capacity to enable the replacement of losses, geographical depth, to absorb a series of defeats, technological conditions that prevent rapid ground movement. So one of the big things, whether it is in life or war, is your ability to actually absorb defeats and how that can continue. Now, all manoeuvre warfare in conventional large-scale war ends up turning at some point into attritional warfare. And I'll speak further on about how if there is even a major war in the world with the major powers at the moment, that likely that would still turn attritional. I read a really good paper on this. In attritional wars, military operations are shaped by a state's ability to replace losses and generate new formations, not tactical and operational manoeuvres. The side that accepts the traditional nature of war and focuses on destroying enemy forces rather than gaining terrain is most likely to win. So you could point at examples here of, okay, is Ukraine stepping back in the Donbas to destroy the enemy forces and not trying to gain terrain because they've accepted attritional aspect there? But you could also point in the Kursk, the opposite there too. I do believe, due to Soviet doctrine versus NATO doctrine, which Ukraine is more working off, that Russia has accepted the attritional aspect of this more and are then being able to generate new formations and replace losses more easily. Of course, that helps if you have 3 times the larger population as well. So this is one of, though, the problems with Ukraine's attritional strategy is, of course, you've got the population is much smaller, but Russia has proven in past wars that it does have the ability to absorb absolutely huge losses. And of course, this has had effects in their population that range decades and will go centuries into the future as well. It affects that for well over 100 years, it will in some cases. But Russia does have a large industrial base and a large population also. Now, another issue here is Ukraine's capability is completely funded by democratic countries. So Ukraine, going this attritional step back can have a problem too, because I believe there's probably a lot of pressure on Ukraine to show success at the front line. And by most people's standard, success isn't step back inflicting losses on the enemy. Success is where that red line is moving now into the 3rd year of war. Now, you and I here, we are much more interested in this and watch it much more closely than the average punter. But what I'll say is doctrine doesn't impress the average voter. And if that line keeps moving back, even if it is doctrinally maybe in some areas the correct thing to do, it may not impress the average voter, who then, of course, that affects then the politics in the country, the state of that, and can change where funding is. This is the problem of being completely funded externally and not internally, like, say, Russia. So there is problems there too. What is actually happening in this? Well, like I say, with everything in this war, time will tell us exactly what is occurring and whose doctrine and who's accepted of X part of war will be victorious at the end, because I can't see with where both parties are starting in peace, I can't see a deal being made very soon, unless there's an entire collapse somewhere. But let's talk about peace negotiations and who maybe has the card. Now, this was by the Kyiv Independent today. That Ukraine's surprise invasion of Russia's Kursk Oblast has derailed Russia's plans to dictate a peace deal on its terms and strengthened Ukraine's hand in any future negotiations. We must force Russia with all our might and together with our partners to make peace. The Kursk incursion is breaking Russia's negotiating strategy. So this is what I spoke about, I guess, in the beginning of this, is how much, I don't think it's completely, if it went to the table right here and now, of there needs to be a negotiation right now, Russia holds significantly more cards than Ukraine. That is just true. It is internally funded. They have the initiative in many areas on the front line, and I think what Ukraine is relying on here is the amount of POWs taken and the kilometres taken as well. Okay, great. Even at a 5-to-1 kilometre swap in Kursk and here, Russia's still going to. They've got let's call each square kilometre one ticket. Russia has 100,000. Ukraine have I'll give them, by this area here being cut off, I'll give them 2,000. It still doesn't mean you're going to have the upper hand if it is a pure land negotiation there either. You've got to be realistic. And another thing, and I'll sound pricky in this, not a single area in here, whether it is Sudzha, Koronovo or Glishkovo, not a single area in here is as strategically or tactically important as a lot of other areas that are currently occupied. It's nowhere near Sevastopol, not Mariupol, not Donetsk, not Luhansk. So it could actually be in that exchange, maybe then the other way. Same with the POWs as well. Russia has previously expected to impose its peace terms on Ukraine because it held the initiative by gradually gaining ground in the Donbas since 23. But the Kursk incursion is changing that trend. As I've said, when we compare in size over the last 12 months, maybe yes. The strategic importance of some of those hubs may be very differently. I believe if Russia went right now, we'll give you back Avdiivka for this area, I think there'd probably be a swap, regardless of the size then comparison. The President Putin has made it very clear that after the attacks on Kursk Oblast begun, there could be no talk of negotiations. That's from Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. And this is something we need to take into account also. Is Russia at the end of the year even interested in peace negotiating terms? There's got to be some compromise here. And if there's not to be any compromise by Ukraine going to that, if it's Zelensky's 10-point peace plan, then Russia may not be interested at all if they believe that they can continue pushing on these areas. So we do need to get out of our head this assumption that Russia is 100%, yep, we want the peace negotiation right now. They may. Of course, there's a lot of benefits in it. It helps their industry. Of course, they're losing a lot of guys. Of course, that raises a whole bunch of problems at home. But at the end of the day, like Putin has said, it needs to be on realistic terms. And what is realistic right now, when we look at what has changed here, you can see this is impressive over a couple of weeks compared to what has been made. But is it enough to then have Ukraine dictating the terms if it was tomorrow? I do not believe so. So speaking on this redeployment of forces, and oh my God, this has got long. I thought this was going to be short. We can see these areas marked out. So we sort of Krinky, Kherson, Zap, Donetsk, Kharkiv, Luhansk, and then we see then up in the north here as well. Sorry, Kharkiv Mark II. So Deep State talk about this transfer of troops to Kursk. From the beginning of the operation in Kursk, one of the versions began to be discussed, that its purpose is to withdraw enemy forces from the eastern theatre of hostilities. But for some reason, there was a widespread opinion that the withdrawal of enemy units should take place immediately from Pokrovsk or Toretsk. But there are other areas of the front line that are the opportunity to drag forces. So this idea that immediately, as soon as that opened, Russia would pull the force from Pokrovsk. But there's, of course, other areas. There's 1,000 k's of front line. During the active phase on the left bank of the Kherson region, so Krinky, when the Ukrainian military had a bridgehead in the Krinky area. The Muscovites concentrated a group of troops there, with which they tried to knock out the defence forces. To date, it is not expedient to keep all these units in that area in such numbers. This is one of the places from where the enemy can and does transfer forces. So, of course, Ukraine had that bridgehead. Russia had a lot of force there fighting. That bridgehead pulled back, a lot of forces. They can then send somewhere else. In Robotny, where we spoke about earlier, Russia, the task of cutting off this was mostly informational for propaganda purposes and no tactical or strategic value. So in Robotny, we've spoken about this a million times. I think Russia's offensive there was, one, recapture defensive line, so that definitely has tactical and strategic value, but it was, secondly, beyond that, trying to turn back Ukraine's 2023 counteroffensive successes. But for this, they also concentrated a number of forces which had already been erased but have the opportunity to use. They can sacrifice the area to remove some units and transfer to Kursk. So down there, they can also go, right, okay, we won't push as hard here. We'll go up there. This is one of the things when you're trying to stretch your enemy's forces numerically out, that's not really offered to the side that doesn't have the numerical superiority. Luhansk, eastern borders over Kharkiv region, the Muscovites have a significant concentration of troops in Luhansk, both in the zone and depth of territory, and rotations reserved. This area is located not far from Kursk itself, so it can make a possible shift. So it's a lot closer than, say, Kherson, so it can shift. Northern border around Belgrade, so of course up here where we've seen the force across and Russia really peter out in the first couple of weeks here, but there's still a lot of active fighting here. It was not fulfilled of what they were trying to do. They gathered a fairly powerful group here. Started the operation at Kursk. The Russians pulled up reserves there and actively discussed the media report of the head of Kharkiv. So moving troops away from there. There are still many hot areas at the front where active combat is taking place, but the widespread opinion at the beginning of the operation was precisely about Pokrovsk-Toretsk, so New York, which already reached the fighters and were instilled in them some hope that the enemy there is actively advancing, has opportunities and prospects which they will develop at any cost. So the fighters in these regions look great. Because of the messaging, there's going to be a redeployment of the forces here who are advancing on us, and so far that has not then occurred. What we do presume too, though, is on the Ukrainian side, given that hope, some of their reinforcements or rotations were moved up into Kursk as well. Pokrovsk, Minograd, Toretsk are very important targets in that area, which the enemy will definitely not sacrifice, given that we cannot stabilise the situation there. The enemy has a huge concentration of forces there, even before the beginning of events in Kursk. The Russians pulled up reserves there because they began to achieve success in the advance, and even if the brigade is withdrawn, it is unlikely that it will be felt very much in the course of the fighting. To this date, this has not been very well tracked, but only time will tell. So it doesn't seem that there has been that redeployment of forces that we think that this initial gamble of Kursk was right. We push into here, Russia's going to have to be forced away, but there's other areas of this. Will there be something else open up? Are we wrong? I don't know. Like deep state say, like I say, time will tell us if we are incorrect or not. So let's come down into New York, Toretsk front and have a little bit of a look. Now this mustn't be a mistake because it still shows that, say, this would have been fixed and caused quite a stir. So let's have a look then at this. The situation in New York is difficult. This is deep state. The enemy does not control the village, despite the statements of bloggers and Telegram Institute. So some are saying that Russia control this, but it does look like Russia's gone around the outside of it. And what some people are saying is, has Russia gone, fuck it, we don't want to fight in this heavily dense built-up environment, and just actually gone around it and surrounded it complete, causing, of course, over a number of days or weeks, there's going to be huge problems in the centre there that this map then shows. Just avoid it, go around it, and eventually it will then deteriorate the situation in there. It's not the first time we've seen a strategic envelopment like this. So let's talk just while we're in this area a little bit more. We said yesterday that this map showed more ground up in here than the Syriac map. He has now corrected this up in here to show advancements in the centre and as well out in here near Druzhba and where this road runs to. Now we spoke about Bakhmut, Chasiv Yar. Now nothing's shown on this map. Let's have a look at what Syriac is saying here. So he showed yesterday this push across the water canal, but we also did mention that more to the north here, that this map actually showed more ground yesterday, I believe. Let's turn that on. Yep. So Syriac now is catching up to this in that area. lastly, let's speak of Robotny down in the south where we spoke of earlier in this video. I'm going to zoom in one more click, I believe. That no changes around Robotny itself. Of course, these look very, very different. But just up here near Bilheriavka, there is some small change said to be up in here around this Luhivsky village. Again, not shown across the maps, but these actually do line up fairly similar now. So maybe, so this red dot is that. So maybe it's Syriac catching up on this. But legends, that's all I've got for you today. Look after yourself. Have a fantastic day. If you want to support me, there's links down below. But otherwise, I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye. Oh, my legs.